Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Coach's Corner University podcast. I am your host, Paul O'Need, and again, going to try and continue to do a better job of plugging my own shit. So, Coach's Corner University is now $300 off for lifetime access to our Essentials program, our Essentials community. The Essentials community is over 150 hours of continuing education content, and it can be all yours for a one-time fee of $50 if you use code BEEFCAKE300. My guest today is a longtime friend, someone who I find absolutely hilarious in a lot of different ways, and I know you guys will too. Mr. Get as many steps as humanly possible, Dean Guedo. Dean, welcome to the podcast, man.
Good to finally see you on a podcast in your podcasting room. And I was
Looks good, eh?
I was gonna say that before that, but then we had like a microphone mess up. But everything looks like awesome.
Thanks, bro.
We have the same books in the. Well, you can't see my books, but I got my Dune. Well, the ones I bought, anyways.
Yeah, that was actually one of the best gifts I've gotten in terms of books. Was those books. I'm not typically a read for pleasure kind of guy, but I mean, they hooked me in. I just got by the fourth book, it just got way too weird.
Yeah, so I stopped at 4, more because I needed a break because it was just so messed up.
Like he's a worm, and then he's also got magic powers, and he can read people's minds. It's like
it was nuts.
It's a lot.
It was a lot, but I think I contacted you when I was reading it because you were like, hey, you're reading Dune? Basically, all my friends that read Dune messaged me. They're like, yeah, it gets fucking crazy. Just like stick with it. And then I did, and then it got crazy. So it was like the expectations were met.
Yeah.
And they were almost blown away in the beginning. And then at the end, it was almost weirder than what everyone said. I think you just can't define how weird it is when you message someone without wrecking it for them.
I would agree with that. So, dude, we haven't chatted in quite a while. What have you been up to? I don't think, we've never done a podcast on my channel before.
No.
So maybe give a quick intro on like who you are, what you do, and then we'll kind of get into the meat and potatoes of what we wanted to chat about today.
Yeah, so like I think I've reduced this down so that it's easy to jump right in, but I'm like an ex-college football player turned teacher, quit teaching to do fitness, so I'm an ex-fitness dude too, an ex-teacher, and then I turned fitness into nutrition online, and somewhere in between where we met was I was a power lifter. I got an elite total in 2 weight classes, but could never end up pushing it to the point where I was actually strong. And then I was in it so early that when I thought I was strong, then powerlifting kind of blew up. And then I realized I wasn't strong. And you were coaching me at the time. And I was like, yeah, I think I'm done. There's 0 ways I can push to like these numbers without like 10 years of work. And I'm already broken. And so I quit that. And then, like I said, nutrition online. And now I do jiu-jitsu and nutrition online. And yeah, like I don't do.
Dude, when we were, I tell people, I'm like, yeah, at one point I had a top 10 total in 2 different weight classes all time, which means at the time, I'm one of the 10 strongest people to ever have competed in powerlifting.
Yeah.
And then now I'm like top 100.
Yeah, like, and I wasn't as strong as you, so I had like a 1,700 pound total, but my deadlift was strong. And at the time, if I would have hit my numbers, but like, I think it was like top 15 for my deadlift at like 700, like not even that heavy. And then if I would have hit my 735, I would have been top 4. Yeah, literally within a year, that would have been like top 20.
Well, even now, so you competed at 198.
Yeah.
At 198, these guys are pulling 400 kilos.
Yeah. Like almost within like a year. Like it's like no one deadlifted past 780 or something. I think Jesse Norris maybe pushed it.
Yeah.
But then like everyone, even within those lighter weight classes, went from like 700 to like 800 and 900. In like a 2-year span, I was like, yeah, I can't do that. Like I was maxed out where I was at. And so
it's pretty incredible to see the growth of the sport. But you've kind of taken that, you put that behind you, moved on to jiu-jitsu. What was the reason for picking up a new sport and not just being a fitness guy?
Yeah, so like, and we talked about this when I was doing it, but basically like, so I went through this stage of like, yeah, I'm done powerlifting what I do. And I was like, I'm going to get as big as possible. And like, which was awesome. Probably kind of what you've experienced. I'm not going to speak for you, but when you kind of go from bodybuilding, building size and going back to strength, you were so strong. Like, it seems like you're so strong right now. Anyways, that's how I felt. And then I found out Andrea, my wife, was pregnant. And I was like, I can't, I'm so big and strong and stiff. Like I can't even like walk around with like this kid that's going to be coming. Like I was in so much pain and I was just so stiff. And so I was like, I'm just going to quit and do jujitsu. And like I had this, like usually when I do something, I'll do something pretty crazy. Kind of within a month of jujitsu, I was like, I can't do jujitsu and train this like style of training because I'm so big. And I just literally quit. And again, more of it was like, can I pick up a sport that's competitive into older age? Most people think it's not because it's like it's a violent sport, but the way it's bracketed out, there's masters division, so all the way up till like there's guys competing in their 70s. But it's one of those sports where, again, it's individual, but it's kind of team. But it's so competitive and so difficult and so confusing, and there's so much strategy that like powerlifting, 3 lifts, you can pretty much master those. Yeah, I would argue within a year or two, like if you're really dedicated. Jiu-jitsu, I don't even know what I'm doing still. It's like 3 years in. So for me, that's good. It's like a constant pursuit of like never-ending improvement. But I was stuck within seconds.
I think there's something to be said for just finding something that makes you feel like a beginner all the time.
Yeah, the white belt mentality.
You know, when I moved back to Ontario from Alberta, I was kind of in that stage where I was like, I don't really want to compete right now. I need to pick up something that makes me feel like a beginner. So I started mountain biking.
Yeah.
And one thing that you kind of forget, once you do something for a really long time and you put it in autopilot, you're not really able to be present with it anymore.
No.
But when you're a beginner, you have to shut the world off or else you're going to get really fucked up.
Well, and you have to listen to like advice, like maybe like, because like, especially when you're like powerlifting for a while, but anyways, you feel like you know shit. So you don't like actually take stuff in just because kind of with a sport like that, or just generally when you've done something for so long, even football, I'm not going to listen to a lot of people unless they're like better than me. And that's like good or bad, but that's kind of how you are. When you do a new sport, you realize you suck real quick. Like with mountain biking, you're probably like
oh, I fucked myself up.
You on it, like yeah, like you probably looked like a beginner too, and you know you looked like the beginner, and so like you're humbled almost immediately. And I think that's a good experience for anyone to go through, especially someone with an ego. You can't really hold on to that in those new sports, or you get fucked up and usually quit or get injured.
Speaking of ego, this is something that like I've been thinking a lot about lately. It's like I feel like I don't have one anymore, whereas before I was like very ego driven.
Yeah.
And I took a lot of my identity from my pursuits, whereas now that's not the case at all. Did you find that through, you know, competing, injuries, constant like changing of goals, that you went through like a bit of an ego death kind of?
Yeah, to some extent. So like, I know like a lot of, like, especially ego is like a big thing within the jiu-jitsu community. It's like, you got to drop your ego. To some extent, that's true. I like my coach, he's like a world champion, like multiple times over. And like, I didn't really know what that meant when I kind of joined. I remember within like the first week, he did something and like, I would be dead multiple times over within a 5-minute span. And I was like, holy shit. So it was a death of like whatever I thought I was, because like you think you're tough. Like I played football, I'm a big power lifter, and like I didn't really think that, but I kind of like I got advice from people like, yeah, don't come in with that, and I didn't, but I still kind of did, and that got dropped immediately. But it kind of builds back up. Like I think it's a healthy dose of called confidence is helpful. But I think in some respects, it's got to be rebuilt the right way. And I think a lot of people present fake confidence, which you could kind of call ego or whatever. But I think once your skills developed, I think it's okay to some extent. So like, I'm kind of in the in-between stages. What I won't do again is think I know everything. And I think that's what changing things over a few times has taught me, is that I think that your potential is so much lower once you think you know everything. That kind of when you drop that mentality, at least kind of the rebuild every once in a while, you can kind of reach, I guess, like a higher threshold, so to speak, every time you go through that process. Because I think it rebuilds back up. At some point, you think you know shit, and then you need something to be like, yeah, you don't really know it as well as you thought, and then you kind of restart it all again, if that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. And I think it highlights a really important parallel between business and training, or business and athletic pursuits or physical pursuits, because with the physical pursuits, you're constantly being humbled.
Yeah.
And when you're able to adopt that beginner mentality and always want to learn, that's really when growth happens. Like you mentioned it, like, when you turn off your brain to new learning, you put a glass ceiling on your progress. But as soon as you take that away, like, your progress is almost infinite. And not to mention, this is an area that I actually wanted to chat about, is like, when you're open to learning, it's also a fantastic catalyst for creating relationships.
Yeah.
Like, how would you attribute your ability to network within the fitness space? Because you're someone who does it very well. You can't do that if you're the person who knows it all.
No. And so similarly, like, and again, I'm not the most social person, but I've been able to, like, I guess through passion and pursuit of, like, excellence at whatever thing I'm doing, I kind of find people within that are like me. But the same thing kind of happened kind of with powerlifting, right? I wanted to go really hard. I found a coach, Brian Carroll. We kind of joined up with 1020 Life, and that's how we met. But, like, I kind of fit myself in there by, like, interjecting myself through, I guess, the pursuit and, like, trying, right? Like, being someone who represents what I guess that's about, and you kind of find similar like people or similar minded people. That kind of happened with fitness. Like, I remember, again, think ego driven, but I was like, man, these fitness people suck. They're weak. They don't train. They don't know anything. Again, had a big ego. Then I show up to a fitness conference. I was like, you know what? I need to kind of branch out. I'm too big for my small pond. I didn't really believe that, but, like, in some extent, I was like, I need to branch out. And I actually met Mike T. Nelson. He was just on your podcast.
Yeah.
But I realized, like, and I didn't even know who he was, because, like, I'm like, powerlifting is the best. Everyone else is stupid. And we're talking about stuff, and, like, blew my mind.
Blew your mind, yeah.
Blew my mind. I was like, actually, I don't know anything. And then kind of restarted that process. But through that, like, I didn't come there with, like, I know everything. I was like, I know a lot. I can bring a lot, but I also want to learn a lot. And kind of that pursuit of excellence in fitness, I treated fitness like I treated powerlifting, or like I treated football.
Okay.
In the sense that, like, I wanted to be the best, right? And what does that mean? You kind of have to accumulate all this information, learn stuff, practice it, do all this stuff. I just take that and kind of bounce it through the next thing. But I think, like I said, a healthy dose of ego does that. But kind of to go back to your question of building relationships, I think when you kind of come in with an intention that's real, right? Like, for me, it was about excellence, but I didn't pretend like it was something else. Like, I went in with that, and I held that, and I kind of wore that, wore it on my sleeve, I guess, so to speak. And kind of people came, right? At the same time, you got to put yourself in those situations, kind of like I've seen you do with even the business stuff, is you got to put yourself in a room. You need that healthy dose of confidence or somewhat skills or a background, and then you put yourself in there, and then you have to do the work of, I guess, meeting and talking and doing all that stuff. But I think that it kind of comes with those steps. Is like, you have to have the right intention, you have to have a skill set, and you also have to put yourself in the rooms. And I think in an age where, I guess, we're online a lot, you can kind of build that a little bit through podcasts and, I guess, meetups. But I think you physically have to be there, because you kind of understand, like, we're humans and there's a community and all this stuff. You can't do that without being there. And I think travel for me, especially in the fitness space with conferences and even seminars, I probably spent 20 grand my first year just traveling to places and meeting people or lifting with people that I thought I wanted to learn from, right? Or I wanted to learn from. And I think that was huge in my growth, right? But also, again, I invested, so to speak, in the industry that I wanted to be in. And I think that if you don't do that, you'll kind of be stagnant.
I think that's a phenomenal word to use, as investment, because that's exactly what it is. Like, when you're investing money in the stock market, you're hoping for a return, but you got to take that risk. Mm-hmm. And the risk is putting yourself out there, putting yourself in the room, spending the money to go to these places. And I think for me, I spent so long, like you said, being a big fish in a small pond. Like, this isn't to, like, pump my own tires, but, like, in Ottawa, if you say my name, everyone knows who I am.
Yeah, you squatted 800 pounds like 20 years ago.
Thanks. But in the grand scheme of the fitness industry, I think some people have heard my name, but, you know, there's not necessarily everyone who does. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, whenever I go into these rooms, there is a balance of, I have a level of expertise in a certain area that no one can touch. But I'm very self-aware of the gaps that I have. And because I'm so passionate and because I'm so like, I truly live, like eat, sleep, breathe this stuff, that's palpable and it kind of draws people in. I think people are almost afraid to be excited about stuff and afraid to show that they're interested, that it limits their opportunities.
100%. And like, so we talk about ego and lifting and doing all this stuff in a big fish in a small pond, like very similar to you. I'm not as big as you, I'm taller, and I don't squat.
It's not hard to do, bud.
Potentially may deadlift more, but I might even match your bench. But
you beat my bench.
Yeah. But you go to these places and like, I do have a resume, like my body and my strength. Like I can walk in a room and confidently say, I'm probably in the top 1% of this room in strength, or was at some point. And to me, like people respect that, just like I respect Mike T. Nelson might not deadlift 700 pounds, but he is probably one of the smartest individuals. And you'll know that within 5 minutes of talking.
27 seconds of talking to him.
Right. So you can go into these rooms with that experience and bring that to the table. And I think that's where you have to put yourself in those rooms, though. I remember very vividly, kind of through the Mike connection, he hooked me up with Dr. Ben House, and he was like, me and my business partner, he emails us, and he has this like camp where, for anyone who knows Pat Davidson, he's a crazy man. He invented this thing called the Cajun, which is just like, I don't even know what you'd call it. It's just like this strength circuit of deadlifting, bench, pull-ups, shoulder press, but dealing with massive weights. Like we're talking like 500 pound plus deadlift, 400 pound plus squat, and doing like reps. Anyways, long story short, there's this competition. He's like, I think you guys would be interested, but we're going to do it and bring some education to it. But because I put myself in that room, I was interested. Mike vouched for me and I was strong. I got invited to this camp and I go in and like show up, and I didn't show up. I lost. There's a whole story about that. But part of that process was me going to New York, lifting with Pat Davidson and his crew. And I remember very, very like, and this is where I think the networking part kind of blends in, is that we went out for lunch and we went to Chipotle, shot the shit, made fun of people. It was awesome. And I remember one point, it's like, we're like, oh, like, don't worry. Like, we don't have to hang out with you guys. Like, I know you're just helping us out. He's like, no, we wouldn't have even invited you for lunch if we didn't like you. Right. And that kind of continued the whole week of lifting. But again, the lifting part initially was, we had to go lift with him. And like Pat is like benching and he fails like 5 times, like does nothing he teaches in any of his stuff. And I was like, man, this guy's crazy. And then he's like, you're up. And basically I had to go to failure, but I had to prove that I was what I said I was, but also that I was part of, I guess, the process, so to speak. And I wasn't just talking about it. Right. And I think that when you're that thing, or you are the thing, and you kind of go out and prove it, I think that speaks volumes in those kind of rooms. But again, that was my strength and my interest kind of helping me network. But I also just couldn't talk about it. I had to go do it. And I think that's where you could do that in business. Like whatever your thing is, use it to your advantage, but also go out and showcase it and I guess share it and prove it, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that a lot of people did before. And I think that if we go back to the jiu-jitsu thing, I don't want to rant, but
no, it's great.
I couldn't showcase to my kid all these things I was. I played college football. I was an athlete. I did all these things. I wanted to raise her like that, right? I'm not doing those things anymore. So I had to figure out what can I do where I used who I was or who I am and showcase it going forward without saying that's who I used to be. And I think that's the continual, I guess, process of you have to be that thing. And the second you quit, you are what you are now, not what you were before. And so putting yourself in those rooms, but also doing the thing, even into our older age, I think goes a long way.
I couldn't agree more. And there's so much that you can pull from that. I guess, especially as a young coach, I think there's a level of imposter syndrome that comes along with it. Like you think, oh, like I shouldn't be in this room. I have nothing. I funny enough, I had this conversation with one of my mentees because I'm speaking at the Super Coach Summit in August. Shameless plug. And he was like, should I go? I'm like, absolutely. Put yourself in the room. There's going to be some great coaches there, some great educators. And his response was, but I don't think I have anything to offer. And I said, who cares? You're there to take. Yeah. You're there to take in. You're there to absorb. No one expects you to offer anything, but I can guarantee you, if you get in a conversation with somebody, there's going to be something that you do or you say that is of benefit.
and it might have nothing to do with fitness. That's the cool thing.
Yep.
It's like the lunch meeting, or like the lunch where we're just like talking about
Shooting
nothing
shit.
to do with lifting. It's like, if you go there and you just want to talk about lifting, like, I guess that might be who you are, but I think you have to bring all of it to the table. Not just, hey, we're at a fitness conference, we're going to talk about bench press and squat and deadlift technique, and oh, that guy did this shoulder press thing. No one really wants to talk about that, right? That's what the presentation's for in the Q&A. And I think like that piece, you do have a lot to bring to the table, because again, you've lived the life that they haven't lived. I've met a lot of smart people and strong people who know nothing about life, like who can't even pay their bills, right? Who don't have clients or whatever, like whatever thing you want to say, like they suck at a lot of things.
Yep.
Like I suck at a lot of things. And I think that's where the benefit, strength gets you in the door, information gets you in the door, interest gets you in the door. But that's like such a small piece of networking, but even the industry as a whole, and meeting people and bringing stuff to the table, is that the table is very big. The fitness part's such a small component of it. For some people it's bigger, but yeah, like I think if you go in with that mentality, I think then again, you never know where that goes, especially if you don't limit yourself to just, yeah, I'm not the smartest person on the bench press or whatever, right?
Yeah. I always find it funny, and it kind of like almost like wear it as a badge of honor. Like when I walk into a room, especially with like business people, they immediately think that I'm an idiot.
Yeah,
because I'm like 250 pounds tatted on my neck. Like they go, this guy's fucking dumb. And then I start speaking and they're like, oh, okay, I get it now.
Well, and you speak very logical. Like I don't speak like that. They think I'm an idiot and I look like an idiot. Then I say some smart stuff. You sound smart.
Well, thank you. Let's pivot the conversation back to coaching, to, kind of your trajectory. Because I think I always try to highlight different people's journey within their careers, because I think there's a lot to tease out in terms of how to make the best decision for you within a certain time. So you started coaching. Did you immediately jump into working for another company, or did you start on your own?
Yeah, and like I like my story, like I do, like I like where I'm at, so like I can talk about it. It's where I'm not the most successful person I'm not making the most amount of money, but I love my life. But so I want to intro that in the sense that I agree with you. I think that there's different paths you can take that are totally okay. I started out teaching, so I went from a position to reducing it to subbing so that I could take on a training position. Basically, I was done. I don't like unions, and I don't like working very hard for nothing. Basically, if I work harder, I don't get more, and I don't like that. And so again, I like lifting, powerlifting. I'm gonna go coach, and so I went right to a private gym. Totally luck. Like place was opening up a new facility. Again, my resume, I'm probably one of the strongest people in my area at the time. Yeah, like come be a coach. And so I transitioned almost immediately. So I did subbing, teaching, and then I coached fitness, to the point where I was so busy with fitness stuff because they just loaded me up that I had to quit teaching. And for me, that was the best choice. Be so busy that I hate my life and then drop one. And I ended up dropping teaching.
I did.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where my intro to fitness was right spot, right time. And I was just teaching powerlifting seminars, training group classes, doing strength stuff, and then one-on-one training. Almost within, I want to say a year, I was like at almost 40 sessions a week, which again is a lot, right? It wasn't like it was like 40, but like it was a lot for me, considering if anyone has ever trained, like an hour of training is like you're there for an hour straight, mentally involved. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot, but yeah, that's kind of where I started.
When did the nutrition coaching come into play?
Yeah, so like somewhere along the line, the guy I was working with, we went and opened up our own facility, and then COVID happened. So we opened up our own facility. I was like, yeah, we're gonna have tons of time, right? We're making double the money now, less clients. So we just had less clients. I worked way less and then built an online presence, or tried to. And then, yeah, COVID happened. And through that process of conferences and networking, I had actually helped build. So I worked for Stronger You, and the owner of Stronger You Nutrition also needed to build a fitness component to that. So my business partner and I, through conference and meeting up, maybe a few drinks, we're like, yeah, we'll do this. And he's like, yeah, message me on Monday, thinking like we're not going to do it. Totally messaged him. And then like the rest is we built the company. And then again, we kind of dissolved the company because they got bought out. But through that process, he owns a nutrition company, and I was like watching their nutrition coaches just getting stacked, because like kind of right before COVID, everything was kind of blowing up, and then COVID, it really blew up. And they're doing really well. And this is like not that difficult in terms of like the components of what it is compared to personal training. And I was like, can I just like coach? He's like, yeah. I was surprised you didn't want to coach. I'm like, well, I didn't know. I didn't really know what this was. I know all this stuff, but like there's like a business here. It's like, yeah. And so by the time kind of COVID hit, we had to close our gym down, and I was like, yeah, load me up. And again, kind of like the personal training thing, is like I kind of right spot, right situation. They just gave me everything, and I just had to coach. And so like that blew up almost instantly. And kind of the rest is history, where you kind of realize time for money. I'm having a kid, I'm doing all this stuff. I need time and I need money, and I'm making double the money for a quarter of the time potentially. I was working more because I was really loaded up, but yeah, like online nutrition in terms of potential for time and money was insane, to the point where I was like, why would I personal train anymore? And I just didn't. I just was like, you know what? I'm going to start a family. I'm just not going to personal train. I'm going to go online. And now we're here.
That's one thing I think people don't necessarily realize is like, if you have good systems in place and your processes are on lock, if you're only coaching nutrition, your ability to handle a large roster, man, if I only coach nutrition, I could have 150 clients. That'd be totally fine.
Yeah. And like, we've talked about this, like you went a different direction, right? Like you're doing all the stuff.
Yeah.
And like, I was like, I don't want to do all the stuff. I just want to coach because I make enough money. My wife makes enough money. We have a life, and I want to be present for my daughter, right? And so, and do jujitsu and do all the stuff. So like my life is more situated around, I want to be a coach. Not that I don't want to do all that other stuff, but right now, like load me up with the potential to just do that one thing, because I can do it well, I can enjoy it, and I can also have a life. Not that you don't have a life, but my life is like, I almost have a full-time job. Like all the stuff I do outside of it, I like that, right?
And so, I mean, it seems like starting a family was like a big mindset shift, or like a catalyst for you to kind of reframe your priorities. And this is something that I know for a fact, when it comes time for us to start a family, my priorities are going to shift, and I'm going to want to be a present father. And that's probably going to mean outsourcing a lot of the things that I do now. It's probably going to mean bringing on more people to help. It's probably going to mean downsizing my roster, because I don't want anything to come in the way of being a father.
Right. And it can, like, you learn that, you will learn that, but like you almost learn that really fast. And not like you're kind of preparing. Not that I wasn't preparing, but as you kind of heard the story, a lot of it just happened, not necessarily by accident, but way faster than I thought. And that was the same thing with nutrition. It just happened to work out. So I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, like priority shifts. Like, it's just one of those things where I look back on my life before, even as a teacher or as a personal trainer, I don't know what I would do right now. Like, because I would be so busy, my time would probably be 1/10 of what it is with her. Right. And like, I couldn't imagine that now. And again, that's the life most people live. So I'm just like grateful I don't have to do that. But that's kind of what online nutrition has offered me, which again, wasn't really a thing even when we were starting. Like it was, but it was kind of underground. And so, yeah, like priority wise, we are lucky enough, at least in this industry, where we can pivot, and there's opportunities to do that, to reprioritize. Teaching, there's not. Here's the schedule, and like if you want to keep your job, you're going to coach. So here's the other schedule, and yeah, the rest of the time is for you. I don't necessarily like that. And there's not that many places. There is a lot of places, but fitness, at least in nutrition space and strength space, there is that opportunity if you look for it.
Well, you're also in a position, because you work for another company, that you don't actually have to focus on client acquisition.
Nothing. I don't have to do marketing.
You don't have to do. You literally could disappear from social media and still have a full-time job, still make money, and be totally fine.
Right, and that puts me at risk. So like, I will talk about the risks. Like things have been down since COVID, and I've been picking up extra contracting jobs and doing my thing. But like my main job is Stronger You, right? But the risk is like, if I lose that job, so like let's just say that company blows up, it's not going to blow up. But like I'm now at risk, right? And so there is a risk to it. But at the same time, I don't do any marketing. I should do more social media, but I kind of go in spurts. And again, I don't have to do all this stuff that you teach. Not that I don't want to do it, but it's like I'm not in that position right now. I like just existing in the background because my job isn't my whole life, and for a good reason, right? Right now I'm in a wave where there's so much other stuff that I'm prioritizing that I need this to be on maintenance. But I know, I can feel it, like as she gets older, things are kind of going the opposite direction. And I think that that's okay. But again, that's a balanced thing, and you got to figure that out for yourself. And again, I think that it's okay to just make money working for someone else. And there's a lot of opportunity, and potentially it's a better situation. And you arguably, for most people, might make more money because there's a lot of people that you mentor, but there's a lot of people that you don't, and they aren't doing too well. Like, I'm making way more money than them with less time invested. So again, that's a process that everyone has to figure out for themselves, but there's a lot of failures in this industry too. And
oh man,
you know what I mean?
Especially as the industry grows in terms of the number of people that are involved in coaching, there is a shortage of coaches. Like there's a surplus or a saturation of people, but there is a shortage of actual coaches. And to be able to be a signal within all of that noise is becoming harder and harder and harder. And I think, you mentioned the risk and the reward of working for a bigger company. Like, for you, that risk reward makes sense. When I think about it in terms of more so my own personality, whenever I'm not trying to do more, I almost feel like I'm going backwards. Mm-hmm. There's this impending doom associated. Like, every day I wake up and I'm a little bit scared.
Yeah.
And I think if I was ever in a position where I did have to put the business on maintenance and I didn't have something else to occupy that little like fear, I would go crazy. But again, I'm like, well, if I was a father, that fear is like, oh, my kid's not going to grow up to be a good person.
100%. Like, so if you have a kid, you don't have to replace that with work. But at the same time, it almost grows. I would say it grows because, like, I do have backup plans, like I do. And like some of them involve like mortgages and like lines of credit and all this stuff. Like, what would happen if I lost everything? Could I live for this long? And the answer is yes. Like, there's ways you can go about it if you have a brain and you understand finances and all this stuff. But like, contingency plans are a thing, but also like building is a thing, because kind of my plan A right now, I'm in plan A. I don't want to be in plan B and C and D. So there's still that, even though I work for someone else, because the fear, instead of it being me having control over it, to some extent, I have zero control over it, which I don't know if that's worse. It's just different.
Talk to me a little bit about the financial management piece, because it's not something that I've actually gotten into with any of the guests, because something that I try to really hammer home to those that I work with is very few people retire as coaches.
100%.
So what are you doing on a daily basis to prepare yourself for the time when you don't coach anymore?
Yeah.
Who taught you about plan B, plan C, or is it something that you kind of learned along the way?
I think I was very fortunate. My dad was a banker. So like, he was always like, you got to get your debit card. And then like, I had a credit card, and during like college, so some of it's self-taught, a lot of it's advice from other people. But like, I remember during college playing football, like in Canada, school's a little different. Like, our scholarships aren't that big, like they can be, but I was maybe getting half my schooling paid for. And so anyways, long story short is I was balance transferring credit cards and learning how to like move money to kind of be in debt and be okay with debt. So I've always been okay with debt, but then figuring out, okay, you got to start saving, you got to start doing this, you got to start doing that. And then leveraging like mortgages for lines of credit, not necessarily to use, but to have as like a safety net, or building a business or investing in education. So it's kind of just learning, how do I not be broke? How do I save for retirement, like you said? And part of it was when I left teaching, that was taken care of in teaching. You have pension, you pay into it, which was kind of scary in its own sense, because like I'm tied to this job for this pension. And so again, I married very well. That's also one advantage. And so she has that, and I have the risky job right now, and that might switch at some point. But then understanding like, like you're not going to be coaching forever. And so that's the savings part. So we have like a little spreadsheet where we do our expenses. Again, having your own business, at least in Canada, has a lot of loopholes. I know we're not going to get
man. It's
like, I pay a lot less taxes because I own my own business. So like, there's that, and like utilizing and learning that system. Also getting a good tax guy. I have a Greek tax guy that hates the government, and he's awesome. He's like, we're going to ride the line so close. They're not getting any of your money. So that was probably the number one thing. It's like, get that guy, and then figure out how to save money. And again, don't get house poor. Like, there's a lot of stuff, but you kind of that whole thing with, I have strengths and weaknesses, understanding that you ain't going to get the chance to be in that room if you're broke. And in some respects, having a house, mowing the lawn, presenting that, like, I'm already ahead of the game, and people are like, wow, you got a house and stuff. I'm like, in this industry, I'm like, yeah, like, you don't. But I think that a lot of people mismanage their money because, again, I don't think that they understand like life costs money. And what are you going to do when you're 50 or 60?
Yeah. Like, that's one thing. I'm so fortunate that I was in the position that I was in when I moved back to Ontario, where I was able to buy a house.
Yeah.
And now when I look at our life situation, I don't know if I actually told you this, but I just signed on with a lawyer. We're going to be moving to the US.
Yeah. I kind of knew-ish you're in the process.
Yeah. So we spent the winter there in Houston. We're likely going to be ending up around the Charlotte, Raleigh area. But part of the reason that we're so confident in our ability to make that move is, well, we have a home that has like $400,000 of equity in it.
You could pull that at any time.
If ever we are in a situation that we're fucked, we sell the house, we're fine.
And like, the crazy thing is, that's the situation we're in. That's not the situation everyone who's coming into it is, because the houses are so expensive. So it's like, you got to learn about the real world. And I guess that's kind of where this is coming. Like, the advice is like, that because you did it, you lived it, you have the experience, and now we can take that on. But like, you have to live in the real world too, not just.
Did you ever? So I know that I personally fell into this trap, and I'm even now still kind of pulling myself out of it. Did you ever fall into the trap of the fact that money comes in so quickly, and the immediate response is, oh, I have all of this money, I can buy nice things?
No, because I was always poor. But kind of now that I have more money, I spend more money. But I also have my principles that we have our like non-negotiable, so to speak, like our savings plan. We intentionally are on the same page where we try not to spend as much. But yeah, like, so I'm the reverse. Now I'm spending more, but I always try to like the thing I try to do is like, do I really need it? Like, or is it, if I'm going to get something, it better be something where I get a payoff that's like substantially greater over time. Meaning like, a video game is a good example. A video game, $70, and I don't have the time to do this anymore, but that's 130 hours for $70. There's a lot of things that cost way more per hour. So I'm like looking at like, just fundamentally, do I get a lot out of this thing? Is it going to last? I don't know if that's answers the question, but yeah, like I was anything. I'm so cheap because I was so poor that like, that doesn't really bother me as much because I can live off nothing.
Yeah, I'm in a situation now where like, so the only thing that I really spend money on is our vehicles, because I really enjoy driving a nice vehicle.
Yeah.
So like, I have a brand new truck, live as a brand new SUV, but here's the thing: we leased them under the corporation, so they're complete tax write-offs.
Right. So if you have a good tax guy and you understand that it actually doesn't cost that, it benefits you more to lease it. Now we bought ours because, again, for the same reason, we can only leverage a certain amount, but we don't like vehicles, and I'm the only one that uses it. But if you have two people, there's like loopholes with investing in farms and stuff, but like, you can have a lot of the stuff you want without like just like going broke. But that you have to go learn about this stuff. It's tough. And I know you're bringing in a lot more than previous, but like I said, I think if you understand the principles of even who you are and what you do, like I spend $150 on jiu-jitsu every month. I don't spend that much, and I get a lot out of it. But if I only went once a week, that would be a shitty investment. I probably wouldn't do it. And so, but that's just kind of how I'm wired. And so, wired the other way, you got to kind of have some bumpers in place, because that can get out of control real fast.
For sure. And like I said, I fell victim to it initially. Like, I remember I was like, oh, like, I'm making some money now, I'm going to buy a Mercedes. It's like, okay, well, that's probably not the best use of your money. And, then I was like, okay, well, usually my bad decisions centered around cars. Yeah. Finally, so fucking shitty. So I ended up in a negative equity situation on like 3 cars in a row. finally this past year, I was like, cool, I'm going to lease a truck. And the financing options that I got on the lease got me to a position where in 2 years I would be negative equity free and I could get out of this lease early. I was like, fuck, sick. I'm finally going to be out of this hole. 13 days after I bought the truck, it got stolen.
No.
So now there was like $17,000 in damage to the car. Insurance paid for it all, whatever. But because of that damage, now I can't give the car back early. And I've got to drive it for the duration of the 4-year lease. And I was like, well, I'm still not, I'm not in a negative equity situation because I can still drive this thing and it's a really nice vehicle, but I was so close.
But so like, that's living a real life and hopefully learning from it, right? Like we coach people, like you sucked at that and you need to suck and then be listening and open to like learning about it to then get something out of the suck. I think you can take that mentality with a lot of this stuff because I would just call that living, right? And I think a lot of people don't do that because again, we as coaches think that we're the top of the food chain with this stuff. And then we suck at all this other stuff. We have all the experience needed to know what a client's going through because we are that person for so many other things that half the time if you just listen to your own advice and apply it to other stuff, you can build it up super easy. But at the same time with nutrition, I see a lot of stuff about, they suck at this, whatever. But it's like, you suck at learning about cars. Like, you bought a fucking Mercedes. Right?
Yeah,
and you shouldn't do that. Like, but at a certain time, there's priorities on all this stuff. And it's interesting because you have to live, I guess, is kind of what I'm getting at, to learn stuff.
I mean, I think I'm probably the poster child for learning things the hard way. Yeah. But I wouldn't have it any other way because it's allowed me to be in a position where I can teach others.
100%. And you're open to it. Like as anyone I know, like, again, I've been following you too, is that you've essentially adopted a lot of new stuff over the years and gotten better from it. I think but you go into it, not necessarily trying to fail, but like going into it, like not trying to, like you're risking stuff to do it and you get stuff out of it because you're aware and intentional with it. Not necessarily intentional that you're going to succeed 100%, but you're almost further ahead than the 100% because of, I guess, failures along the way. And like, I know that that's like super like esoteric and stuff, but I think that a lot of people are missing that because of imposter syndrome or whatever, however you want to label that. Again, fuck it. Like,
be smart about it. Risk it to get the biscuit, baby.
Like, be smart about it. Like, keep your teaching job and join fitness. Like, don't listen to the people who say go all in, but I think that you can build something out of a situation you're in if you truly want to, and then kind of
So for people who are not watching and are listening to the podcast, you may not see the fact that Dean is walking while we do this podcast. So if he's a little out of breath, you can.
I'm at 1.6 miles per hour. I should be good, but if I get you notice.
Tell me about high flux. Tell me about walking. Tell me about steps. Why are you the walk more king?
Well, I'm the walk more king because I put the Amish King as my Instagram handle and made a joke about it. And my wife said that's cultural appropriation, which I disagreed and agreed with because it's not, because they're not on the internet. They would never know. So if they're not offended by it, it can't be cultural appropriation.
The tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it. Like, doesn't make sense.
It's not, but she brought up a valid point. So I was like, I'm just going to be the walk more king. But it all started, so kind of to go full circle back to Mike T. Nelson and Ben House and that group of individuals and professionals that include tons of people that you listen to on podcasts. Like, it was the best thing ever. But part of that process was I joined kind of like a mentorship like you did with Ben. And it was kind of like a science research, public speaking, figure out what you do and present it to the world type of thing, where we go to Costa Rica and present in front of like Eric Helms and Tommy Wood and Ben House and Dr. Nelson. Like, there was a few of us who were like, took the leap of having a project where we were open to showcasing what we do and also being like open to critique and manage that over time. And so my process for that was, what do I do? And I was like, I was talking to Ben, I was like, I don't know, like, I do this thing where like, I just like get people to eat a little bit more than what everyone else is feeding them and just like up their steps and shit. And they're like losing weight, eating way more food. But most people would deem that reverse dieting. I'm just starting there. He's like, oh, like kind of like hot flux. I'm like, I don't know. And so anyways, it led me down a rabbit hole of looking at what I do. And part of that was that. And then so researching, and through that project, I found, have you had Jeb on your podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyone who's like listening to Jeb and I are really close, and we were in this project together. So all the stuff Jeb's doing to some extent had started at this same project. And I sent him this research paper about the Amish. It was about some soil study, but part of the soil study was they're going to test these people and see what they do. And they threw pedometers on them. And long story short, I sent them this graph, and I was like, there's 0% obesity and they're like 6% body fat, something stupid. Like, and again, even if it's like not 100% correct, they're under 10. So anyone who knows body comp is like that's pretty like lean. And the women were kind of in the same situation. Yeah. And I was like, they figured out obesity. And then you kind of look at this graph of their steps, and they're doing 17 to 20,000 steps a day, 10,000 on Sunday because that's their rest day. But that's like 8 times what normally we do. I mean, not 8 times, but
it's pretty close. It's pretty close. I mean, I just read a study that said the average American walks about 3,000 steps a day.
Yeah, like 3,000 to 4,000 steps. So it's like, but like, let's just say it's under 5, so that no one like I walk more. It's like, nah, they walk a lot more. And so, yeah, they were farmers and all this stuff, but the crazy thing was there's some unpublished studies looking at their diets, and the males are eating around, and anyone who knows Amish, like they don't eat great. They eat World War II era type foods, pies, cakes, butter and everything. Healthy dose of breakfast, lunch, and supper. And again, they don't drink, but men eat about like a surplus of like 3,000 plus calories, and women were about 2,000. And let's just say that's close. They're eating more or less what normal North Americans eat, right? And normal North Americans are obese, and they're not. And so what was to that? And that led me down the rabbit hole of identifying, it's physical activity, it's probably steps. And then I looked at the Hadza and all this stuff. Anyways, long story short is, what are they doing? And it's more or less they're doing more, they're eating more, but they're doing a lot more that allows them to be at a body fat percentage that is much lower than what we currently experience and what we're trying to get our clients to do. I was like, that's what I do. And so that's kind of where it started, was that was high flux. And then I went down the rabbit hole of, is there much studies? There's not. No one's talking about it really. They had an article by the guy who ran PN. No, I can't remember. Berardi. He talked about G flux, I think, in the early 2000s.
Yep, I remember that article.
And I do too. And I was like, oh, like that's, and that maybe that stuck with my head, but still, my thing was like, and I love this about it, is no one's talking about it. It works, and it's way better than what everyone was doing. Why is no one talking about it? So I just like to be the anti cutting calories guy, but really it's just, I'm talking about walking, which to me is funny because everyone's like, yeah, it's not good. Like, it's not that good. They just need to walk a little bit more. I'm like, no, like it's actually probably way more important than you're meticulously counting calories that you're going to get Karen to do for the rest of her life, based loosely off a bodybuilding program and diet. And how is that working for you? Oh, it's not working because obesity rates are as high as they've ever been, and information age and training industry is bigger than it's ever been. So maybe we're
missing the point.
Yeah. And so I like that, but no one cares.
Dude, I love it. I love it too, and I'm a big proponent of it. And I kind of took it in a different direction. I was like, well, listen, if you took it from a weight loss obesity perspective, I took it from a muscle building perspective. And I was like, if I can get to a point where activity level is so high, training intensity is so high, and I drive calories up so high, well, that's just more protein turnover. That's more nutrient partitioning.
100%.
We should, by virtue, build more muscle. And before anyone chimes in, yes, there is a limitation, especially with bigger people, usually men, where you run out of appetite. Right? You get into that 5, 6, 7,000 calorie range, and you just can't eat that much. The digestive stress becomes too much. But I got this, I wouldn't call it a system. It's more just like things that I try to do to leverage metabolism. So I will first drive up activity level. So getting to that 10 to 12,000 step range usually ends up being the top end for most people who have real jobs. If the step count becomes a time limited issue, I'll just have them do like miss or like, zone 2 cardio to drive up calories. So if we equate calories of 12,000 steps versus 8,000 steps and some of that being cardio, cool, that's fine. But we get to that point. Number 2 is I'm going to drive up protein intake, right? Leverage protein over feeding. What's that going to do? Well, it's going to increase metabolic output. It's also going to increase thermic effect of food. And lastly, it's going to increase satiety. So people are going to more likely eat less total calories, but because their activity levels are so high, boom, we get this situation where weight loss is happening. They're still eating what they would consider to be higher calorie. They're never hungry. Adherence isn't an issue. And then, oh my God, I look like a fucking genius. But I'm just approaching the same problem from a different direction. Rather than driving down calories in, I'm just driving up calories out.
Well, and you add timing to that or whatever, but like they're eating so much food, in my opinion, they're never really under fueled. They might be under recovered, right? There's a lot more general overall work, but if you're an athlete or trying to get like, if you're not taking care of recovery, like you're not ready for any of this shit anyways. And so like, again, you talk about nutrient partitioning, but even just availability of energy, I find workouts and we're talking the same system for fat loss as weight gain and maintenance. Mm-hmm. And I've done it, right?
Yep.
The biggest barrier was like satiety. And then, oh my God, now I'm dirty bulking, but really I'm just trying to get my calories in, and I'm not dirty bulking. I'm like still super lean. And any of the strong men I've dealt with or strong women I've dealt with, they're eating like 5,000 plus calories. They're trying to drink apple juice and insulin at the same time. But
apple juice and insulin, the breakfast of champions.
Like, I think things are turning over now, or in the sense that a lot of these athletic ventures that were strength sports, we thought they had to be super obese essentially and like out of shape. And I would say the exact opposite is true now. Mm-hmm. Now people are starting to eat and perform at a much higher level, looking a lot leaner. But again, strength to weight ratio, now they can start pushing these upper ends of weights and be totally ready for a heart attack. But they're going to be leaner and bigger, which now 400 pounds, if you're 350 of muscle, like you're going to, and this is random numbers, but you're going to do much better than if you were only 200 pounds of muscle or whatever, right? So again, I think leaner to some extent, and again, high flux is probably a better answer. It's just way harder to do. For anyone who's actually done it in a surplus, way harder to do.
Way harder.
Off, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, my favorite thing to talk about with regards to nutrition is actually body recomp.
Yeah.
Because there's this constant narrative of you have to be in a surplus or you have to be in a deficit, and eating at maintenance, you're not doing anything. And I'm like, wait a fucking second. So you're going to tell me that if I eat at maintenance, I'm intaking an adequate amount of protein, but I'm training like a fucking animal, that I won't put on muscle and lose fat? That just, from a thermodynamics perspective, that does not make sense to me.
Not
but
at all.
What if I can do that with a high activity level and a high food intake? And I am the perfect case study for this. I'm 250 pounds and I still have abs. I'm the strongest I've ever been. All I do is I get between 8 to 10,000 steps a day. Most of that, or most days, 5 to 6 days a week, that also includes 30 minutes of cardio, because time commitment, I have to put the cardio in to get the total calorie output.
Mm-hmm.
Bro, I'm still eating like almost 4,000 calories a day.
Well, food ends up becoming what everyone says they want people to do, right? You're going to eat for performance. With high flux, you're eating for recovery, like especially in maintenance, right? You're going to try to push that upper end of how much food can I get, and we'll just say not lose weight. I know that that's going to be a variable number, but also, is my performance going up? We can eat up to that. And the hard part is recovering. And a perfect example was when I was kind of learning, walking through this stuff, but going through the project, my jiu-jitsu schedule had gone up. Like, I'm trying to win worlds. I didn't win world, but I'm like, my intent is to be the best athlete possible.
Right.
I got a walking treadmill. I was walking, Andrew was pregnant and all this stuff, so we were walking a lot. Plus I was walking when I was working. I was at like 20,000 plus steps, way too much. But it was way too much because I couldn't recover. I was getting sick like every 2 weeks. And Mike T. Nelson, again, our good friend, he was like, like, you're just not recovering. Why can't you eat more? I'm like, well, I can't eat more. I'm so full all the time, and I'm eating like almost 4,000 calories a day, and my weight's like dropping. I went from 240 to like 210, just walking, doing jiu-jitsu, not even watching my diet, eating as much as I wanted. I had to actually drop my steps in half, and then it cleaned up everything. But if I were to eat more and recover harder, sleep better, do all this stuff, I'd be good. I don't have a food problem, but for people who eat so much food, there is a solution. You can eat so much food because you have to. That's a good place to be at, because then you don't think about food because you hate food. And not that I want everyone to hate food, but once you have that experience of understanding, I have to get that cake in because the alternative is I have to eat 20 potatoes. Again, now we start to redefine our relationship with food without even attempting to change our relationship with food, which is what I like about it from the fat loss perspective. But you also realize how hard it is to do when you actually have enough activity to need to recover and to eat to recover. The Amish, they didn't have a choice. If they didn't go to work, they ain't making any money and their whole farm blows up. So they just ate out of need, right? And that's a cool relationship with food. They just ate to do the thing that they were meant to do. It's a cool place to be at. And I think High Flux offers that. But in our environment, we have to kind of change a few things, but I think it's totally possible.
It's really interesting to me that you mentioned the relationship with food piece, because I think one of the biggest things that I enjoy about more of a high flux approach is this idea of abundance. Most people, when they look at nutrition or diet, they view it through a lens of restriction. I can't eat this, I have to eat less of that. Whereas when you approach it from a high flux scenario, it's, well, I have to do more of this, which allows me to eat more of these things. It allows more flexibility. If you're not as hungry, you're not going to be driven by cravings. Is this something, like, I know you work very closely with Jeb, who's involved in that like emotional eating side of things.
Yeah.
Is this an approach that you really leverage within that scenario?
Yeah, and like when I work with Jeb and a lot of the stuff that he does, his is about like emotional eating and food in the mind, but I like to like kind of play on words with food in the mind. With this stuff, food is on the mind for the right reasons. It's usually physiological and it's not psychological, which is what he's trying to get people to, I guess, down regulate, is that emotional piece. There is no emotion in this. The only thing is now we're switching food for activity, which you can have a horrible relationship with that too. But I mean, if you make it fit and do it right, again, now we're not talking about you can't eat this. Because the second people start saying you can't do something, that's the second they like in their head want to do it. If you told me I couldn't have pizza, I'm going to want pizza. It's just kind of like our natural human reaction. We're not, our DNA isn't.
Don't press the red button.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I don't want to get into the evolution thing. We only have a short amount of time, but like, we were not evolved to like, well, we were evolved to restrict, but we don't want to restrict. And that's kind of the problem we have, is we've solved that solution as a society of providing food at no cost of activity. And we can even make money and provide for ourselves without any activity. And I think the missing piece, if I was to look at big fundamentals, is that we are just underactive. And take the steps out of it. I push steps, but I actually don't think that the volume of work we do in a day, for the amount of time that we have little time now and no work done. And at the same time, we have no volume of work period in a week. And so a lot of the recommendations, and this is why I love my approach, is people push less food. You got to have discipline, do all this stuff. Doesn't work. For the same reason I was saying, you got to restrict. On the abundance part, people make fun of me because I'm like, well, it's just walking. You're pushing the same thing. I'm like, well, I'm pushing that as a narrative, but generally I think we're underactive as a total. And so those people are like, well, why don't they just lift in the gym? 100%. Get activity up. You have a small amount of time. I think muscle's good. But generally, that's just not fucking enough. It's just not enough. I don't care what you do. Lifting in the gym, you're a power lifter, you're a bodybuilder, your workouts are insane. Powerlifting, maybe. But they're not even really that insane in terms of total output of work.
Bodybuilding is way, like my calorie intake when I'm doing more like hypertrophy style work, even take it back. So I've been basically body weight stable for the last 6 to 8 months.
Yeah. When
I was in the off season versus this meet prep that I'm in right now, calories are probably 1,000 calories apart.
Yeah.
Whereas baseline steps are the same, cardio is the same, but because my training intensity and frequency has dropped, it's 1,000 calories a day. That's a lot of fucking calories.
Right. And so like you're the perfect person in this world that pushes that to Karen.
Mm-hmm.
Karen ain't gonna do. She's gonna do what you do at your worst, and probably even worse than that. And so generally, lifting is not enough. But we both know lifting can be enough, plus steps and all this stuff. And I think in either way we look at it, volume of work for the time we have, most people's workouts suck. So we have these people pushing less food because it works, right? And we have people pushing getting into the gym because building muscle is good. But still, as a general recommendation, I'm still falling back on government recommendations, which is probably 150 minutes of activity, plus going on my approach, probably getting way more than 12,000 steps if weight loss is your goal and food is your issue, right? Because my argument is that most people aren't going to change their food environment, because if they were, they would have already done it. Does that help? Yes. What certain new studies are out, and kind of like my new way of going about things, is I think we can make a few small food swaps, kind of like we were talking before, but get general activity way more up for the volume of time and have way more success than changing our food environment so drastically that we live like Paul and Dean, which people aren't going to be us, other than if you are a niche clientele basis. But as a whole, I think that doesn't work. And that's kind of where I think there's this disconnect in the industry, is that we're coaching people to do what we want to do. We are the crazy people.
Yeah, I totally agree.
We are the crazy people. If you look at what we do and you told some aliens that we were like the pinnacle of health, they would be like, they're the crazy ones. And so again, I think that the narrative has to change. I think high flux is part of it. Again, how people do that is that volume of work. Activity has to go up. I don't care how, actually.
Yeah, me too.
You have to recover from it though. And it's like,
that's part of the reason why I like steps, because people will be like, oh, well, walking isn't physical activity. I'm like, cool, let's build on that. So if it's not physical activity, you probably don't need to recover from it. So if you're going to do more of anything to drive up calories, let's just walk more. And we'll, like, you've been walking here for, an hour at 1.6 miles per hour, which is probably about half of what I would normally walk on if I was walking on a treadmill. But the thing is, your calorie expenditure is probably an additional 100 calories an hour, maybe.
Yeah. And it's not even that much.
That adds up though. 100 calories a day for 7 days, 700 calories. In 5 weeks, you're down a pound of fat. People don't think like that. It's that whole, I overestimate how much I can do in a day, but underestimate how much I can do in a month. Mm-hmm. It's the perfect example of that. And the last piece that I want to really hammer home on this is when we talk about training intensity and we're talking about training non-athletes, their version of an intense workout is not the same as ours. And this is where I think coaching plays a huge role in teaching intensity, teaching intent. And coaching also plays a huge role on the other side of things, preventing that negative relationship with activity and food that can happen on the fringes, because anyone who might be susceptible to restrictive eating behaviors is also likely going to be at risk for this like exercise dependence.
Mm-hmm. And that's where I think walking skirts around all of that. So like, and hear me out, is that usually those people that are exercise dependent, they're basing on classic exercise. They're like, I'm going to go to HIIT class, then I'm going to go to another HIIT class, and I'm going to get in the gym and I'm going to do some bodyweight push-ups. Cool, right? If I honestly think there's no negative to walking more, to be honest. Like even if you got walking dependent, everything else gets better. Appetite regulation, even partitioning of energy, because you're kind of at low level activity all day. Mental health, assuming you're outside and not on a treadmill inside an office. And again, it stacks up calories and it pushes flux. And to me, it usually fixes the regulation of appetite into that physiological appetite, which is listening to your hunger signals. But they have studies where the GLP-1 levels of people who walk an insane amount doesn't go up pharmacologically, but kind of close. And so all of these, and we don't have time to talk about that issue, but I think that you could be a crazy walking person and be less crazy than the crazy food person, the crazy exercise person. I think if we were going to be crazy, like let's just say base level, you're going to be crazy anyways. I would rather than be crazy walking, to be honest. Assuming they're not going to change.
We should have you, Jeb, and myself on and just talk about GLP-1s.
Oh, we could do that. Like I have so many group chats, I have so much group conversations with Jeb about how stupid everyone is and how awesome GLP-1s are, but also how if they just coach properly, we wouldn't even have this fucking problem. But that's
all right, so we're gonna organize that podcast. I like to finish off the podcast with some ridiculous questions. Yeah. So intentionally, what has been your highest step count you've ever had?
Like 34,000 in a day.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I worked for like 4 hours. I get about 6,000 steps an hour on my treadmill. So 4 is 24,000. And then I usually get 10,000 a day just with walks and just normal life shit. And so yeah, 34,000. And I was like bagged. Like I talk about walking, not being able to recover. At a certain point, like I said, after 20,000, it feels, you're tired at the end.
Yeah, we did when we went to New York City last May for Liv's birthday. I think our average step count per day was like 27,000 over 3 days, and we were both just cooked.
How much obesity do you see in New York?
That was one thing we did notice. There's not a lot of fat people in New York City because they walk so much.
Almost zero, and if they are, they're tourists. And so they're just saying, and they walk everywhere.
I'm just saying. I'm not saying. I'm just saying.
I'm saying, but I got 20,000 steps on average just existing, and we didn't even we sat a lot, but going from place to place a lot. But yeah.
What's been the most humbling part about joining jiu-jitsu?
Realizing how easy it is to kill someone, and also realizing that if you're a little less trained than someone, you're inevitably going to die. And so now I don't think about violence at all because I don't know what the other person knows. And if they know something a little bit more than me, I've experienced it. A choke is death. And I've been I have my coach could choke me out 10 times in 1 minute and I'd be dead 10 times. And so there's a lot of people like him that are just slightly better than me. I would die. And
they're also probably tiny too. So you probably had like little tiny people choke you the fuck out.
Big people and tiny people, that's actually like more humbling. I can't say that a lot of tiny people, I still feel like size matters, but it doesn't to some extent. And again, the idea that I could die so easily or learn that I could die so easily thinking I was like fucking tough. Oh man, I don't look at violence the same anymore, which is I think probably good for my health, to be honest. Coming from a bouncing background, I thought
every big guy's worked as a bouncer at some point in their lives.
And I've fucked up a lot of people in some regard, and I knew nothing, so I just got lucky. Like that, I look back on that time and be like, I'm lucky I didn't die.
The last question I have for you: if there was one person that you would like me to interview on the podcast that hasn't been on before, who would it be? The caveat is you have to help me get them on.
You know what? I think you should interview Rick, the puppet, the fitness reps, Rick house. I don't know. I think he's awesome in this industry. Yeah, I swear to God. So go look at Andrew Coates' podcast with Rick Strong. Follow him on Instagram. I'll help you get him. I'm not going to tell you the whole story behind it, but I think reducing fitness information down to humor and simplicity is what this industry needs, because everyone's so serious and they think it's such this big deal when a lot of the concepts are very simple. And like you said, finding fitness information is getting harder and harder and harder. And then finding evidence-based people who actually know what they're talking about, we're losing them in the noise. I think the way to fix that is to make fun of all the dumb shit and reduce it down to simplicity. And I think that movement starts there. In my opinion, I don't know if it'll blow up, but I love making fun of serious people that don't know what they're talking about. And
I will entertain this. If there was, parting words of wisdom for the podcast, what would it be?
I guess challenge the current narratives. If you're a new coach, you get taught a lot of stuff. Start listening to people with experience, actually coaching people who've been on the floor or who have actually gotten results, because I think that there's a lot of things to learn from them, and they may not be the most popular. Okay, and a lot of the information that we see at the forefront, there's some good and some bad, and everything in between. It's really hard to filter that out, especially in the social media age. Again, there's a lot of experience, and I talked about ego at the beginning and thinking I'm a big fish in a small pond. Even locally, there's just badasses everywhere, and they're the people in the trenches. And I truly have come back to that, and I think that it all comes down to simplicity. I talked about 150 minutes a week of activity. I was laughing with Jeb. I'm almost pushing the basics of that the government was talking about 30 years ago as probably the ticket in a lot of ways. And I think that all the information has kind of already been there. It's being recycled. The people in the trenches got it down, in my opinion.
I love it, dude. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me and being on the podcast. I'll have links to where everyone can find you in the show notes. Thank you, everyone, for joining and listening. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and we'll catch you on the next one.